Hello, I'm Cameron Powell, and welcome back to White Noise. Today we are discussing race relations in the United States of America, namely the Black Lives Matter movement versus the alt-right movement. There's been some confusion between marching for justice and protesting for equality. Today we're just talking about the similarities and differences of these two groups and what that means for individuals in society. What is your take on the Black Lives Matter movement and the alt-right movement as it comes from your perspective?
Okay. I feel like the Black Lives Matter movement is trying to pursue justice for certain crimes that have been committed against Black people, multiple murders that have gone unanswered, whereas the alt-right is more based on not losing their white culture or white heritage, as they believe it to be.
I'm much more sympathetic to one than the other. So I think that obviously I feel like it's been well documented that we've got an issue with police brutality and not just police brutality, but I would also say just the criminal justice system in general, incarceration, etc. So I feel like that's fairly well documented, and I'm glad that some activism is happening to bring attention to that, because if anybody isn't aware of it, they need to be, so that people can start thinking through constructive,
I feel like Black Lives Matter has its place, but my mindset is, why did it take so long to get a Black Lives Matter? Because when, there was black on black crime, nobody wanted to say stop, let's do a Black Lives Matter now. It wasn't an issue until, like I said, it became an issue in pop culture. And the only reason it became an issue in pop culture is because celebrities spoke out about it, but it was an issue way before then. So I say, yes, Black Lives Matter is needed. I just feel like it took too long to get there. Now, in regards to the alt side, who am I to tell other people that they can't, express themselves? Personally, I'm not for it nor against it, because I can't tell a person they're right or wrong for what they believe in. So I can't say if it's a positive or a negative, because obviously they're fighting for what they believe in, just like Black Lives Matter.
According to an article entitled "The Alt-Right Movement" by Marcia Clement, the alt-right claims to be afraid of losing their culture, their country, and that people are trying to erase them from society. Therefore, they are not racist, so to speak, just pro-white. How do you feel about that statement? Is there any truth to it, in your opinion?
I honestly believe that's not true at all. Like most conservatives, I would totally denounce what the alt-right movement has done, and I'm a firm believer that actions speak louder than words, and these words are completely false, and they have acted in a totally opposite way. They are racist. They have said and done very racist things, and just to try to say what this has said, it just doesn't line up with what they've done, so it just doesn't add up. Don't think that there's any truth to that at all. There's no such thing as white history or white culture ever being erased, because this whole country is based on white history. If anything, it's been minority history that's been erased. It's been minority achievements that have been overshadowed by constant things that white people have done. Like, there's no fear of anybody ever forgetting George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or anything like that. But only now do we hear about, the achievements of minorities.
The purpose of the alt-right movement is, it's a way of saying that we have felt that we are superior long enough to now be okay with saying it publicly. And I feel like Black Lives Matter gave them the platform to do so.
How so?
Because like I said, when black on black crime was happening and nobody stopped and said Black Lives Matter now, you said it was okay. So these alt-right people have always been here, but they didn't have a name, they didn't have a foreground, because they didn't have a platform to stand on, because there was nobody opposing it. What people are missing is that although these are two extreme groups and two extreme circumstances, it's still basically a black group and a white group.
But actually what's really interesting is about about how terrorist groups and a lot of alt-right groups and some of the actions they take are ultimately considered either hate groups or terrorist groups, depending on how you define them. But one of the interesting things about it is that all terrorist groups on a right-wing side or conservative side are afraid that their way of life is under siege, and that they are threatened, and that modernity or the modern world is the enemy, and they always want to, go back to some simpler time when they had, more power or more, or there was some ideal. But I feel like it's kind of shifty of them to say that they're not about being against anybody, they're just about being for, because they want to return to a model where they were in a position of power that did in fact impress other people and did not offer other people equal opportunities. So again, I feel like that's a little bit doublespeak, because I feel like their desire to return to that point is itself oppressive.
So in St. Paul, Minnesota, Black Lives Matter protesters were recorded chanting, "Fry 'em up like bacon," when referring to local police officers.
Right.
It was reported that those officers were offended. It was written that St. Paul Police Federation President Dave Titus told CBS Minnesota the chant, which took place during Saturday's 4-hour march around the fairgrounds in St. Paul, was ignorant and disgusting. Quote, "I don't think chanting or singing, which basically promoting killing police officers, is peaceful," end quote, Titus said. Rashad Turner, one of the protest planners, said the uproar shouldn't focus on the group's chant, but instead on recent police killings of unarmed black men and women, like those in Ferguson, Missouri, Cincinnati, and Baltimore. Quote, "We're not going to be distracted by their attempt to minimize our movement and focus on a chant that lasted 30 seconds, end quote, by Rashad Turner.
I agree with what Titus said, that he basically denounced that chant. Even if it was just 30 seconds, it doesn't matter. You still are basically saying fry police officers, kill police officers. And I respect what he said, and he took responsibility as a part of the movement. And then with Rashad Turner, I believe that he was trying to minimize and basically deflect what happened and not take responsibility. And I think what they did was just completely wrong. You don't promote violence. Well, I think the 30-second chant will lead to more deaths in the end. I completely agree with what you're saying about the cops not having to take responsibility. They should be held accountable just like everybody else. They have to abide by the same laws that we do. But I think promoting violence just doesn't solve anything. You know what I mean? Killing people to make a statement, it doesn't do anything. It just makes it worse. It makes the country more divided.
It kind of ties into both. Like, yeah, I see where the cop's coming from, like, oh, that's not like a peaceful protest, but it's not defining of what the entire movement is. Like, if you're gonna oppress people for so long, they're gonna have so many mixed feelings. They're gonna feel angry, they're gonna feel upset. Like, people are supposed to be able to trust cops, but so many instances have happened where black people have been murdered for no reason at all. Like police will just use their power against them and will murder and not face any repercussions. And they're gonna take the time of day to get upset over a 30-second chant is kind of ridiculous in my opinion. Like, you have to understand where both sides are coming from. And I'm not saying that I excuse their chant, because honestly I don't agree with it, but I get where they're coming from. I understand their anger, I understand their feelings, and their chant shouldn't have set off the police in a way that they do when, you know, you have multiple reports of policemen shooting down innocent people and police don't say anything on that. They're like, oh, well, you know, you have a few bad apples in the group. But if they pay attention, a few bad apples spoils a whole bunch.
There are lots of strategies that people use to be able to dismiss what people are doing, you know, and I feel like a focus on, you know, that chant is, is alarming, right, to the listeners that are hearing it. And there is, you know, a sort of a violent edge to it or whatever. But you hear a lot of anger and a lot of frustration. Those are the emotions that are behind that chant, feeling like you are sort of pitted against an adversary, the police that have all this power and do these things and are not ever punished for it. I mean, there's not a significant impact that happens because of it. And so I feel like trying to think about, again, what the emotions and the things are that generate that chant gives you the context rather than trying to dismiss it on, you know, dismiss the whole cause, right, based on that one thing. So again, I think it's always about trying to understand the context. Just like I said, even when you see the alt-right people with horrible signs and whatever, trying to understand what gets somebody in that position that they would do that. And that's where we're going to ultimately find the insight that's going to help us get to a better place than where we are currently.
Kind of brings back to the point, like I said, it's pop culture, it's what's going to sell in the media. The protest itself probably wouldn't have got much coverage because nobody was really going to sit there and watch it because nobody was going to care. But as soon as the slurs came out, it gave someone an opportunity to oppose the Black Lives Matter movement. And like I said, that's the biggest beneficiary for the Black Lives Matter movement is everything that's opposed to it. So as soon as they started saying fry them up like bacon, of course, everybody that was on the police side got upset. The news felt the need to cover it because it, again, touched mostly on probably Caucasian officers that were there. So that created a tension and an opposition for an argument, which made it more prominent for this to be seen. So do I feel like the 30 seconds of chanting should have been a big part of it? Absolutely.
What social institutions played a role in glorifying, condemning, and ignoring both of these movements?
Media, they have a habit of portraying the Black Lives Matter movement as, you know, like violent activists, as thugs, as all these like racially charged terms that we've been hearing over and over again, saying that, oh, they're just protesting and they're just looting because they can, because they feel like they have the right to, even though like the stand that they're taking is very important, you know, because people are dying and nobody seems to care. Whereas, you know, the alt-right has like a peaceful protest with tiki torches chanting that, you know, they're going to get rid of all the Jewish people, they're going to get rid of all minorities, they're going to take the country back. And I mean, I feel like certain people might take them seriously, but from my point of view, I thought it was a giant joke. I know a lot of people turn them into a meme.
Media winds up both glorifying and condemning, right? Because when they feature things, they sort of are drawing attention to it in a certain way. And then sometimes they'll express their disapproval of certain expressions or the other, but it's this weird kind of mix, I guess, of glorification and judgment. Our major political parties, you know where they're going to line up and you know exactly what everybody's going to say. And it is, you know, who will condemn whom and you know who will, you know, glorify. And it just makes me think about MLK's disappointment with moderate people who, you know, if you're not directly affected by these issues on either side, if you're not a card-carrying KKK racist who's marching in some of these things, and if you're not someone who is possibly going to be a victim of police brutality, you can kind of maybe just say this is not my fight or this is not my issue. And King was so ultimately frustrated with the injustice that was done by just people who wouldn't, you know, who wouldn't look just at the moral issues themselves and feel like it was their responsibility.
The main institution is mainstream media. And for, like, just with the media, it's so biased right now that you cannot get both perspectives. With journalism, I believe that their job is to give the facts and let the people interpret. And the media just isn't doing that. They're modifying the facts, so it's only half truths. And they're not giving us what society deserves, so we can form our own informed opinions. and it's really doing us a disservice.
I would say that the alt-right definitely gets a bigger pass on anything. Like, people are just like, oh, like, they're just protesting, they're just trying to express how they feel. But when it comes to people who are part of like the Black Lives Matter movement, they're always criminalized, they're always talked down upon because they're trying to change something that people have just gotten so used to. And it's so hard to make a change in this country, and people would just rather be like, oh, that's a problem for later generations to deal with. It's not as bad now like it used to be, so what's the point in trying to change it?
Do you think there's any common ground for these two groups to exist?
For the Black Lives Matter and the alt-right?
Yes.
Absolutely not. There's no way that the Black Lives Matter movement, which is a movement for justice for people who have been murdered, to agree with a movement that says that white people are better. There's just no way that that's going to happen.
Like with the slogan, like, they will not replace us, like, there has to be some sort of collaboration, seeing eye to eye before things can move on to kind of a solution. So I definitely don't like to think about this being an issue that has to be negotiated between the alt-right and the Black Lives Matter movement. I feel like it is the alt-right. I don't like to think about them being people that we have to negotiate with. I understand that Black Lives Matter activism really shakes some people up, but it seems like people need to be shaken. I mean, people are obviously unaware of some of the things that continue to happen, and I think that's the only way that change happens, is by increasing awareness and reminding people of their moral obligation to do something, to act on the side of justice or to move things towards a more just position.
No, not really. Honestly, when you get so emotional, it's hard to, like with both movements, I think a lot of it is based on emotion and not always logic. I'm not saying that they're not using any logic, but when emotion kind of kicks in, it's hard to change someone's mind. And I find it highly improbable that their minds will change and their mentalities will change. Black Lives Matter, they're trying to promote lives, but overall, that's what they're trying to do. And that's what conservatives want too. We're trying to promote lives. We just have different ways of going about it. And I think with millennials, if we can make the media more accountable for what they're saying, I think we can get much better opinions and maybe be able to go about things in a more civil way. Because right now, with young conservatives and young liberals, we can't even have a conversation half the time.
You know, I think in general, I think that millennials are more open-minded. I mean, I think racism, homophobia, everything, they're all sort of generationally, you can track sexism, racism, homophobia, you can sort of watch the progress that has happened over time. That's a slow kind of process, but it is real. I mean, it takes time, but it does happen. So I think all the reports also and studies that have been done on millennials talk about the fact that they do have sort of a social justice, sort of more of a social justice kind of mindset or commitment, I think, than maybe some previous generations have had that have been more self-focused, let's say, or more apathetic. So I think that that generation, I know people say all different kinds of things about millennials, but I do think that they're more open-minded and civically invested. So I think that the upcoming generation makes me more hopeful about what could come to pass.
Majority of my generation is really striving for social justice. We're really striving for equality. Like, yes, we have it now, but there's so much more that we could be doing. Like, we could be holding people accountable for the things that they do instead of giving them a free pass all the time. Like, we can seriously tackle these issues where you have one group saying we're better than others, and we're trying to protect the feeling of us being better than others, and which frankly just doesn't fit, I feel like, in everything that America stands for. Because, you know, America is a land of equality, it's the land of freedom, but it doesn't feel like that for certain groups.